Today I am joined by one of India's leading marine biologists, Divya Karnad. She is the co-founder of InSeason Fish, which is a sustainable seafood initiative working to connect seafood consumers to sustainable fishermen along the coast. In this episode, we discuss the state of India's fisheries and how the industry needs to be improved to conserve India's rich marine biodiversity. I hope you do enjoy this podcast. Welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Anish.
What motivated you to become a marine biologist and conservationist?
I grew up along the coast, so my exposure to wildlife was always to marine and coastal species. And I knew from when I was young that I wanted to have some kind of job dealing with animals. I thought that I wanted to be a vet, but then eventually realized that I was more interested in wildlife and conservation rather than sort of domestic animals or pet animals. And so because my entire experience was coastal, it seemed like marine life was what I was interested in.
What was the idea behind in-season fish?
So it started sort of during my PhD research when I was working with fishing communities from Maharashtra, and I found that many of the small-scale fishers were already interested in sustainability and they were already doing things. So unlike what I had read in books about how fishers were sort of these greedy people who are just waiting to take everything out of the sea, it did seem like these people were really interested in the long-term sustainability and they were already putting in place measures and management practices to kind of keep up the sustainability. And as a result, it didn't seem like these fisheries in particular needed a lot of conservation interventions because the people were doing it themselves. But rather, it seemed like these fisheries needed market support because the kinds of fish that they were catching, people were not willing to buy. Even though these were from sustainable fisheries and so on, there was just no awareness about this. So even the fishers had brought up this issue that it's important for the market to support and only then they can continue being sustainable. So as a result, I started this initiative called InSeason Fish, which is to kind of create this awareness among consumers about sustainable fish and also to show people where they can get this sustainable fish from.
What are the ecological and socio-economic impacts of unsustainable fisheries?
So in terms of ecology, one of the main ways in which fisheries are unsustainable in India is when the fisheries affect not just the fish itself, but also the ecosystem. So one example of this is bottom trawling. So this is where you have some kind of a weight. It might be a beam or a board or something at the bottom of the net, which is dragged through the bottom of the sea. So when the sea is kind of dredged up in this way, it affects a lot of the natural processes that happen on the seabed. So things like egg laying or even decomposition and stuff like that, which happens at the bottom of the sea, all of this is kind of disturbed. And as a result, it's not just the fish of that particular time that get affected, but also the fish of the future, because the bottom takes a very long time to get back its natural processes. So, for example, there was a study in a marine protected area where just one fishing vessel was allowed to come inside. And the impact of that one trawl vessel in that marine protected area took 7 years for the marine ecosystem to recover. And in India, we have these kind of bottom trawlers that are going out every day across huge parts of our coastal areas. And they are fishing every day. So if you can imagine that one vessel, it takes 7 years for the ecosystem to recover. So our ecosystems are now going to need like hundreds of years to recover. So these are the kinds of impacts that can happen ecologically. And in terms of economics, as a result of the ecosystems being disturbed to this extent, people are just not able to catch that much fish anymore. There are just not that many fish in the sea anymore. And so fisheries is slowly becoming an occupation that is highly risky, and the amount of profits are reducing.
What are some conservation interventions to make fishing more sustainable?
So the things that the fishers are already doing are things like reducing the soaking time of nets. So if they keep the nets out only for about 4 hours in the water and then check the nets, they can often see what they are catching. And in case they are catching things that are not going to give them value, or they are protected species or something like that, they can change the location and the arrangement of the net in such a way that they don't catch that anymore. Because in the sea, even though it just looks like one constant blue mass, there are different types of habitats on the seabed. So it may be a muddy bottom, or there may be rocks, or there may be a coral reef. And depending on this, you might get different species. And similarly, even in the water column, there are certain parts which might have currents and other parts which don't have those currents and all that. So if they just move the net a little bit, you can get a completely different set of species. So checking the nets often is, I think, one important thing. The other thing that people have been doing is to temporarily close areas for fishing, meaning they don't allow anyone to fish in a particular area for a particular period of time. So in Chennai, for example, some of the fishers have said that there's a particular site which has like rocks and a bit of reef, which they call the reserve bank. So they're saying, like India's reserve bank, it's something that you only touch when the situation is like really bad. Until then, you just leave it alone, and it kind of replenishes the rest of the sea.
How can the fisheries industry in India be improved at a national scale?
So I think right now what is happening in the fisheries is that a lot of the really unsustainable fisheries are being subsidized by the government. So the government, for instance, provides some kind of a lower rate of kerosene and diesel and so on for vessels, and also provides them with a compensation during the fishing ban season. So these are things that allow people to still see some level of profitability in the fisheries. Because if they did not have these subsidies, there would just be no profit in the fisheries. So they would be forced to move away from the fisheries and do something else. So, of course, alongside removing subsidies, the government will have to provide for alternate incomes for people. But I think removing the subsidies will help remove this illusion that everyone can get into the fisheries and there is still money to be made.
So, talk about the marine sustainability education programs run by InSeason Fish.
So InSeason Fish does a lot of different types of marine education. Some of these are experiential activities where we take seafood eaters on guided tours of fish markets and fishing harbors, and we show them what are the different fish that are being caught, how they can identify these different fish, how they can tell about the freshness of fish, and also show them a little bit about small scale and more sustainable fishing compared to large scale fishing. So there's like an all-round experiential education activity that people seem to gain a lot from. In addition to this, we also do training activities with culinary institutes. So to tell budding chefs about what are the different seafood ingredients that they can use. And finally, one of the more recent activities that we have taken up is in schools. So we've started an education program for schools in Chennai. We're doing some of this work with students from government schools and some of it also with students from private schools, and trying to sort of see how we can best integrate marine conservation education with the existing curriculum that students have. So to show them how, physics and chemistry that they are learning in class actually can be applied to understanding the marine ecosystem and understanding marine conservation needs of the ecosystem. So we've tried to integrate it as much as possible so that the students get like multi-level learning. It's not just about the marine conservation, but it's about how do you put all your other subjects together to really understand this.
And how can individuals contribute to InSeason Fish?
So we are focused on individuals kind of contributing in multiple ways. One is that we provide this website with all the information about which fish is right to eat in which season. So you can just go to InSeasonFish.com and there you will see immediately like which fish you should be eating right now and which fish you should be avoiding, because it has its breeding season. So as an individual, you make sure that you check websites like ours before you go and buy the fish. That's sort of the basic level thing that you could do. But if you are more interested in contributing, I think to actually follow, to participate in one of our fish explorations, to actually follow the practices by making sure that you buy from small-scale sustainable fishers, I think those would have much higher impact than, just following the website.
You are also the co-chair of the Human Dimensions Working Group of the IUCN Shark Special Group. What is this group about?
So the IUCN has something called a Species Specialist Commission. And these are groups of global experts on different types of species. So although for many other species, the species groups, the number of species included is relatively small. For sharks and rays, we have about 500 species included in this group. So globally, there are about 200 or so experts who have been chosen to come together and make decisions and recommendations for how policies can be made to conserve these species across the world. Until recently, most of these recommendations were based mostly on ecology, mostly on the biology of species and so on. But increasingly, I think it's recognized that in order to do conservation, you have to really think about the social dimensions also, not only the ecology and biology. So in recognition of that, we set up this Human Dimensions Working Group within the Shark Specialist Group. And the main idea of this is to look at what are the kinds of research going on in the human dimensions of, the shark and ray sciences and chimeras, of course, but also to sort of show what is the way forward. How do we kind of use social science techniques to really improve our understanding of how to do conservation for these species?
How many sharks are there in how many species of sharks can be found along the coast of India, and what are the major threats?
So I'm going to put sharks and rays together. So based on which paper you cite, there may be between, say, 160 and 170 or so species of sharks and rays across India. And the main threats to them seem to be coming from three causes. Of course, there is overfishing because, In some places, sharks are targeted as part of the fisheries. In others, they are bycatch. And they just cannot keep up with our level of fisheries because they have a very different biology. They don't produce as many eggs or anything as some of the other fish species. In fact, some of them give birth live, so they can only have a few babies at a time, and they just cannot keep up with that level of fisheries exploitation that we have in India. So fishing is a big one. The next big one, of course, is climate change. As the waters are heating up and as currents are changing, I think that is really affecting shark biology. But also, I think habitat destruction in terms of coastal development or even putting in place dams in rivers and changing estuaries and stuff like that. All of this together, I think, is really contributing to declines in these species to the point where now, I think, other than some other group, they are like the main group of species that are threatened.
So what's being done at a national scale to conserve sharks and rays?
So we have now 3 species of sharks, I think, that are on the Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act. And then there are another several species of rays as well. And there are a whole bunch of species that have been listed on Schedule 2 of our Wildlife Protection Act. So they do receive quite a lot of, attention, which is more than what it was before. But listing species on these schedules, I'm not sure how effective that is in terms of conservation. Because as I said earlier, they get caught as bycatch. So even if they are listed or not listed, once they are caught, they basically die. So there's no real option to release them or something like that. So just listing them on the Wildlife Protection Act doesn't really do as much as if there were more rules about fishing itself and about changing the types of fishing gear being used or more regulations on that. I think that would have a bigger impact.
And my final question is that what have been some of the most prominent challenges from your conservation career and most memorable moments?
I think in terms of challenges, I think in general, it's the kind of work that I tend to do requires the involvement of many different types of people. So I work with people ranging from the fishers who are directly catching the fish to the traders to chefs and restaurants and government. And getting this kind of diverse group of people to work together towards a goal, I think, has been one of the biggest challenges. It's possible, but it definitely takes a long time to make it happen. And in terms of like some of the highlights, I think as part of InSeason Fish, we've done a lot of awareness, as I said, with culinary institutes and with restaurants. And just before the pandemic, there was a restaurant that opened up that, really took on our ideas to the extent where they even hired someone from a local fishing community to be their seafood procurement manager. So to go to that level and, really take our philosophy to heart, I think that was a real highlight.
So that is the final questions for you today. Thank you so much for taking time out and coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Anish.
Thanks.
And I'm looking
Thanks.
forward to it.